After marriage, my husband demanded I pay his $60,000 tax debt because it's a wife's duty. 3 days later, his boss looked at me and said, "You paid his debt?" Then she handed me something that made him cry in front of everyone. When I married Martin, I thought I was finally doing it right. I was 42. Not a young, starry-eyed newlywed, but a woman who knew herself, had a career, a home, and a life built with care. He was charming. He opened doors, listened closely when I talked about my work at the publishing house in Ann Arbor, laughed at my dry humor, and made coffee every morning just the way I liked it. We'd met at a dinner hosted by mutual friends, an odd mix of university staff, artists, and nonprofit workers. He stood out. Older than most, a regional manager at a logistics firm, with salt and pepper hair and that confidence some men wear like tailored suits. I wouldn't say I fell fast, but I fell steadily. He was attentive and consistent, the kind of man who texted to ask how your meeting went or remembered to pick up your favorite tea. The first 6 months were blissful in that mature, uneventful way. No wild red flags, no cold feet. When he asked me to marry him, it wasn't fireworks, it was quiet, solid. I remember him saying, "Let's stop wasting time. We both know this is real." I liked that. The simplicity. I'd had my share of passion that burned too hot and fast, and I was ready for stability. We had a small ceremony at the courthouse and celebrated with dinner at the Earl. Just us, my sister Maureen, and 2 of his friends. I moved into his home, a tidy 2-story in a leafy neighborhood just west of downtown. We merged finances because that's what couples do, and I trusted him. At least enough to believe this was the beginning of a joint life, not the beginning of the end. It took a few months before I noticed the edges fraying. He started getting edgy when I brought up our joint account balance. I'd transferred a good chunk from my savings after the wedding. He said it'd help cover house upgrades, bills, the honeymoon we never really took. But receipts disappeared, and explanations were vague. "I took care of it already," he'd say, waving off my questions. It was just some plumbing work. I didn't push. I was used to managing my own money, but Martin insisted that it made more sense for him to oversee things. "It's part of me taking care of you," he told me once, and in the moment, it sounded romantic. One Wednesday evening, I got home from work and found him sitting at the dining table. No dinner. No music. Just a stack of mail and a glass of whiskey. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. He looked exhausted. Not the usual stress from work, but the kind that comes from being cornered. "There's something I didn't tell you," he began. "It's about taxes. I owe about $60,000. I froze. "What?" "It's old," he added quickly. "Before we were married. The IRS just caught up with me. It's from when I ran that side consulting gig, remember? There were some errors in how it was filed. Not fraud. Just sloppy accounting." I stared at him, unsure if I was hearing him right. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "That's your debt. From before we even met." "I know. But now we're married. It's our problem. Look, I'm not asking you to pay the whole thing. I just need help. A wife helps her husband. That's how this works." I couldn't even speak. I just looked at him. He sipped his drink like he'd just asked me to help with groceries. The silence hung thick. I finally said, "Let me think about it." Over the next few days, he was cold. Distant. Every interaction felt like walking through fog. He didn't pressure me, not overtly. But I could feel it, the weight of his expectation every time he looked at me. I wasn't sleeping. I pulled up old emails, bank statements, anything I could find that might give me a clearer picture. I noticed a few strange transfers, $4,000 here, $2,800 there, from our joint account to something labeled business expenses. But he didn't have a side business anymore. When I asked, he brushed me off. "Just paying off some old dues. You don't need to worry about it." The next morning, I got a call at work from an unknown number. It was his HR manager, Delia. Polite, firm voice. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said. "This is about Martin. I'd like to speak with you privately. Can you come by the office today?" I hesitated. "Did something happen?" "It's important," she said. That afternoon, I walked into the modern glass building off Eisenhower Parkway where Martin worked. The receptionist looked at me like she already knew. Delia came out within minutes and led me down a hall to a quiet conference room. Martin was already there. He looked like hell. Delia turned to me. "I have to ask, did you pay his debt?" I blinked. "No," I said. "Not yet." "Why?" She exhaled. Then reached into a folder and handed me a stack of printed emails and financial statements. "Martin has been under internal investigation for a few months," she explained. "There were inconsistencies in his expense reports. Unapproved transfers. We were watching him closely." My stomach dropped. "We weren't sure what the full picture was until last week. We got an anonymous tip, someone claiming to be close to his ex-wife. Apparently, this isn't the first time." Martin still hadn't said a word. Then, Delia continued, "We noticed some activity in your joint accounts. Large withdrawals. It looked like he was preparing to pay off the IRS. He told me I had to help him," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "That's what we thought." She turned to Martin then. "You've been suspended pending further review. You'll be escorted out after this." Martin's face collapsed in real time. "You don't understand. It wasn't like that." But Delia just stood. She looked at me and handed me another envelope. "This is for you," she said. Inside were detailed breakdowns of his transactions. Names I didn't recognize. One was a woman he'd transferred $6,000 to. Another showed a rental in Traverse City. He told me he'd gone up north for a solo weekend to clear his head. He stood up suddenly. His voice cracked. "Celia, please. Don't do this. You know me." But I didn't. Not really. As security entered, he broke down completely. He didn't yell. Didn't lash out. He just cried. In front of his coworkers. His boss. Me. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not pity. Not relief. Just a strange, hollow clarity. I'd married someone I didn't know. Someone who had spent years polishing his image, carefully choosing what version of himself to show, always playing the long game. I was just his next mark. I left the office that day and drove straight to Maureen's. I didn't go home. I stayed at Maureen's that night. She didn't ask too many questions. Just poured me a glass of wine, put on some quiet music, and sat beside me while I tried to organize my thoughts into something that didn't feel like they were bouncing around a pinball machine. It's funny how the mind tries to protect itself. Part of me still thought there had to be a misunderstanding. That maybe Martin had just panicked, that maybe Delia had it wrong. But the paperwork she handed me, the numbers, the names, they weren't vague. They weren't hearsay. They were receipts. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment from the last year in my head, every odd little thing that I brushed off because I didn't want to seem paranoid or insecure. How he never introduced me to his ex-wife or even showed me old photos. How he was weirdly evasive about credit card points, or the way he insisted on doing the taxes alone this year because it's complicated. That next morning, I went back to the house. Martin wasn't there, his car was gone, but I moved fast. I grabbed all my important documents, birth certificate, passport, social security card. My laptop, my journals. I took photos of every drawer he kept locked and backed up the bank app statements. And then, I made my second most important call of the week, my lawyer. Her name was Nadira, a no-nonsense woman Maureen had used during her own custody battle years ago. I liked her instantly. She didn't try to sugarcoat anything. After I told her everything, she gave a soft humph and started taking notes like a machine. "You have enough to file for divorce and protect your assets," she said, scrolling through the photos I sent. "But if you hadn't delayed paying that debt, you'd be in a very different financial position right now." She was right. I'd come within hours of wiring over almost $25,000 of my own money to the IRS. Martin had been pushing hard the night before Delia's call, saying we could split the rest later. That this wasn't a fight he could win alone. I almost felt sick thinking how close I'd come. Over the next 2 weeks, Nadira filed the paperwork. Martin, meanwhile, tried every way he could think of to get to me. Calls, texts, emails, even a letter slipped under Maureen's door. All had the same desperate energy, remorse mixed with blame. "You don't understand, Celia. They were going to take everything from me. This isn't what you think. You're overreacting. I love you." Not once did he say sorry. Maureen suggested I block him entirely, and eventually I did. But before I did, I screenshotted everything. Meanwhile, Delia called me again. She wanted to make sure I was okay. Said Martin's official termination had been finalized. I asked if any charges were being pressed. "There's an internal case," she said carefully. "It's in motion, but I can't say more just yet." Then she said something else. "You weren't the first. You should know that." Apparently, a former employee of the company, someone named Yvonne, had come forward. She'd dated Martin briefly after his divorce. Same pattern. Charming, affectionate, very serious very quickly. And then, money issues. Investment opportunities. Personal loans. And finally, ghosting. Delia said she'd given Yvonne my contact info with my permission. A few days later, I got an email. Yvonne was in her early 50s, lived in Kalamazoo now, and she poured her heart into that message. She'd lost almost $18,000 to Martin. Never reported it because he convinced her it would ruin him and she just wanted it all to go away. She'd spent 2 years rebuilding her finances. And she said, word for word, he knew exactly the type of woman to target: self-sufficient, kind-hearted, responsible. "We mistake the chaos in their lives for a need, not a red flag. Don't blame yourself." It hit me like a freight train. That sentence. We mistake the chaos in their lives for a need, not a red flag. I spent the rest of that week combing through every detail I could find. Tax filings, property records, old emails. Turns out, the house I was living in? It was mortgaged to the hilt. Martin had refinanced twice in the last 5 years. He didn't own it outright like he claimed. He was planning to ask me to co-sign on a third refi just before the IRS bombshell hit. He was trying to secure more credit. With my name. The man didn't love me. He loved what I could do for him. I moved the rest of my things out of the house within 2 days. Hired a moving service. I didn't tell him. I didn't owe him that. When the court date arrived, Martin looked smaller somehow. Tired. Grayer. Not the same confident man I met at that dinner party. He barely made eye contact. The judge reviewed our financials, looked over the evidence Nadira presented, and sided with us. Martin was barred from accessing any of my assets. I retained full ownership of my savings, my retirement accounts, and my name was removed from every joint account. He contested nothing. Just stared down at the table the entire time. Outside the courthouse, I saw him walking away alone. And I didn't feel anger, not really. Just a quiet grief for the life I thought I had. I never got the $4,000 back. Or the pieces of trust that he chipped away over those 13 months. But I got myself out. And sometimes, that's enough. After the court hearing, things slowed down, but the storm wasn't over. The silence that followed was its own kind of noise. I moved into a small townhouse closer to my sister. It wasn't as nice as the house Martin and I had shared, but it was mine. Every chair, every framed photo, every teaspoon was placed where I wanted it. I didn't realize how much of myself I had shrunk to make room for someone else until I started living alone again. The first night, I sat on the floor with takeout and a blanket and didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat there, breathing. Then I remembered the envelope Delia gave me, the one I hadn't opened completely. I'd skimmed through it in the moment, enough to see Martin's behavior was calculated, but I hadn't looked at the attachments. Inside were printed logs. Memos. A timeline of his expense reports dating back almost 2 years. There were flagged reimbursements for business dinners that never happened, travel charges to client sites that corresponded with weekends he told me he was visiting his mother in Traverse City. And there, buried halfway through, were 3 invoices made out to a consultant named Bria Mallory. I'd never heard of her. The name didn't come up in any of his stories. So I Googled her. Bria was a freelance marketing consultant out of Cleveland. She had a clean website, a small business Instagram full of quotes about empowerment, entrepreneurship, and self-worth. And in her client testimonials, there was a 5-star review signed by Martin. I remember staring at it for a full minute. He hadn't just fabricated expenses. He'd been hiring someone to help him pitch fake business projects to his own company, coaching him on how to sound legitimate. Someone had helped him write emails to the CFO, detailing market expansion strategies that didn't exist. He'd built a paper trail of professional-sounding nonsense that no one had verified, until the missing money made them look. The worst part? The signature at the bottom of the testimonial, Martin E., Senior Director, WarePoint Logistics. Not Regional Manager. Senior Director. A lie. Just like everything else. At this point, I wasn't angry anymore. I was intrigued. The kind of cold, focused curiosity that comes when someone tries to bury you in confusion and you start digging back. So I called Nadira again. Is it worth pursuing anything legally against the consultant? I asked. If she was helping him fabricate records? She said maybe, not criminally, unless we could prove Bria knew the documents were being used to defraud an employer. But civil court? That was another matter. And just like that, I found my next step. Around that same time, I got a message request on Facebook. The profile picture was a dog, but the name was familiar, Anika Wallen. Martin's ex-wife. I accepted the request and within minutes, she sent a short, polite message, "Hi. I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I heard what happened from Yvonne. I think we should talk." We set up a Zoom call the next day. She looked nothing like I imagined. Not hardened. Not bitter. She had soft eyes and a patient voice, like someone who had done a lot of therapy. Anika told me her story calmly. She and Martin were married for 7 years. The first 5 were normal, if a little dull. Then one day, she found out he'd opened a credit card in her name. Said it was for emergencies. It had a balance of $12,000. Then there was a business investment with his cousin, never verified, never recovered. It was like he didn't believe consequences applied to him, she said. Everything was temporary. Every lie, every mistake, he always believed he could talk his way out of it. Her biggest regret? Not documenting things. Not talking. I was too ashamed, she admitted. He made me feel like I had failed. Like I wasn't supportive enough. Like I didn't believe in him. I nodded so hard, I felt my neck crack. Then she said something that stayed with me. Martin doesn't scam with threats. He scams with guilt. It was true. He didn't scream or intimidate. He made you feel like you were failing him by not helping him clean up his messes. By the end of our call, we agreed to collaborate. She had years of old documents, emails, and voicemails, some of which might help bolster my case if I decided to pursue further legal action. I had screenshots, financial records, and proof that the pattern hadn't stopped. Yvonne, Anika, and I started talking regularly. We joked once that we should form a support group. The wives of Martin, Maureen quipped one night, pouring me another glass of Pinot. It felt absurd, but powerful. Meanwhile, Delia emailed me again. The company was moving forward with charges. Internal fraud, misrepresentation, misuse of funds. They had enough now to involve law enforcement. She didn't say it directly, but I could read between the lines. My hesitation in paying that debt? It had been the final piece. Without it, the timeline wouldn't have lined up as clearly. My refusal created a paper trail he couldn't erase. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a number with a Lansing area code. It was a financial crimes investigator. "We'd like to speak with you about your former husband's activities," he said. "You're not in trouble, we just think your side of the story fills in some gaps." That conversation lasted over an hour. I walked him through everything: how Martin pitched himself, how he created the illusion of stability, how he used my assets as a safety net while he maneuvered his way through corporate fraud like it was a chess game. The investigator asked for documentation. I sent everything: annotated folders, screenshots, PDFs, notes from Nadira. I made a chart. I even included dates of suspicious behavior leading up to the IRS incident. It felt ridiculous, but also cathartic. Finally, I was doing something. I wasn't just surviving Martin, I was dissecting him. I didn't hear from Martin during all this. He had finally gone silent. Maybe because of the investigation. Maybe because he'd moved on to his next opportunity. Or maybe, for the first time, he was scared. I wouldn't know. I wasn't checking. What I did know was this: I wasn't the naive wife who got tricked. I was the witness. The last piece of a long, calculated con that had spanned years and women and bank accounts. And if Karma needed a little help catching up with him, well, I was more than happy to help her find his address. The weeks leading up to the hearing were quiet, too quiet. It was like the calm before a storm I knew was coming but couldn't predict the shape of. Nadira warned me it could take time. Martin might delay, try to negotiate, or even attempt to shift blame. He didn't. Instead, the official charges came in faster than either of us expected. Martin was being prosecuted by the state of Michigan for fraud, misappropriation of company funds, falsifying business records, and filing fraudulent tax returns. WarePoint Logistics submitted a full report to the state attorney's office with the findings from their internal investigation, findings built on documentation I'd provided, unknowingly at first, and then with careful intent. The day I read the charges in print, I sat at my kitchen counter and stared at them until my eyes blurred. I kept expecting to feel vindicated or triumphant. But mostly, I felt tired. Exhausted. Like all the lies had finally settled onto my shoulders, each one with a little more weight than the last. What pushed me to keep going wasn't revenge, it was the realization that Martin hadn't just hurt me. He'd hurt everyone who had trusted him. Anika. Yvonne. Even Delia, who told me during one of our calls that Martin had once been considered for a higher executive position. "We thought he was dependable," she said. "He fooled all of us." The preliminary hearing was set for early March. That morning, I wore a navy suit, not because I wanted to look good, but because it made me feel steady. I didn't bring anyone with me. Maureen offered, but I said no. I needed to do this part alone. I sat in the courtroom, quiet and alert, watching the attorneys shuffle papers and review motions. Then Martin walked in. He looked thin. Not gaunt, not sickly, just worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. His gray hair had grown out unevenly. He wore a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. He glanced at me once. No nod. No smirk. Just a flash of something I couldn't read: resentment, maybe, or shame. The judge asked if he understood the charges. He said yes. His attorney requested time to review evidence before moving forward with a plea. The judge gave them a month. In the meantime, Martin was released on bond, restricted from leaving the state and barred from contacting any of the listed witnesses. I was one of them. That afternoon, I went home and poured a whiskey. I don't even like whiskey. Martin did. He used to pour himself one every time something went wrong and pretend like it made him thoughtful. That day, it just felt symbolic. Later that week, I met with Nadira again. She was pleased with the way the case was shaping up, but she also wanted to prepare me for how long this could drag, how much of my past might get pulled up, and how Martin might try to flip the script. He may not have much of a defense, but people like him don't always aim to win, she said. They just aim to discredit whoever holds the mirror up to their face. It was a chilling thought. But I'd seen it before, how quickly he'd flipped from affectionate to condescending when I questioned him. How he'd made me feel guilty for simply protecting myself. So, I braced for it. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, Martin's attorney filed a motion claiming I had deliberately withheld financial support during the IRS ordeal and that my lack of spousal cooperation had contributed to his mental and emotional distress, exacerbating the financial mismanagement. It was laughable. But still, it made my hands shake when Nadira called to tell me. He's trying to make you the villain, she said. Standard manipulation. We'll shred it. But prepare yourself. I did more than prepare, I got organized. I gathered every message. Every email. Every instance of gaslighting I'd journaled in the months after he dropped the tax BMB on me. I cross-referenced bank transfers with dates he claimed he was handling things. I had a log of every time he told me not to worry. And I had the screenshots, ones I'd nearly deleted, of his guilt-tripping messages in the days leading up to the IRS call. This is what a good wife does. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I thought you were on my side. Nadira read them, printed them, and added them to the packet we were building for the next hearing. And then, right when I thought I'd collected every piece of the puzzle, something unexpected landed in my inbox. An email. From an old Gmail account I hadn't used in years. One I'd created back in 2013 when I was freelancing and still figuring out if I wanted to leave my corporate job. I hadn't logged into it in forever. But I got an alert saying the inbox was almost full, and on a whim, I checked. Tucked inside was a message from Martin. Dated a week before we got married. Subject, next steps. At first, I assumed it was spam. But I opened it. The message read, "Hey, just wanted to say I'm glad everything's moving forward. With the marriage, I mean. This is going to make things a lot easier for me, especially with the stuff from 18. I know we haven't really talked about it much, but once the accounts are combined and I can clean up the back-end stuff, we'll be good. I know you don't want to deal with the IRS stuff, but once I shift the balance and restructure the filings under joint income, it'll all sort itself out. Just trust me. Don't worry about the details." I stared at the screen for a long time. The tone was casual. Not threatening. Not manipulative. Just matter of fact, like I was a puzzle piece being snapped into place. He'd planned to leverage our marriage to clean up his mess before we even walked down the courthouse steps. I forwarded the email to Nadira with the subject line, "He planned it before I even said yes." She called me 5 minutes later. "This changes everything," she said. "It shows intent. Premeditation. This isn't negligence, it's strategy." We added it to the evidence folder. From that point on, I stopped flinching when his name came up. I stopped holding my breath whenever my phone buzzed. I was no longer reacting, I was ready. The courtroom wasn't going to be a place for closure. I knew that now. It wasn't about making him feel sorry. It wasn't about public shame or an apology I'd never get. It was about holding up the truth like a mirror and refusing to let him look away. I didn't care how long it took. He'd spent years weaving a story where he was always the victim, the misunderstood genius, the hardworking guy just trying to get a break. But now? He was out of script. And I was holding the receipts. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late April. Spring had finally come to Michigan. The magnolias in front of the courthouse had started to bloom, soft pink petals hanging like fragile lanterns. I remember standing outside, early, just breathing. I wore the same navy suit. Not because I needed armor anymore, but because I wanted to walk in the way I first walked out, calm, in control, and untouched. The courtroom was more crowded this time. A few journalists sat in the back row. WarePoint Logistics had sent their legal rep. Delia was there, seated near the front, arms crossed like she was daring Martin to glance her way. And sitting behind me, quiet but unmistakable, were Anika and Yvonne. We didn't hug. We didn't whisper. We just made eye contact and nodded. Solidarity doesn't always need words. Martin entered from the side door. No handcuffs, he was still out on bond, but the energy around him had changed. The arrogance was gone. He looked smaller than ever, and not just physically. Like he'd finally run out of mirrors to check himself in. His lawyer rose to make a statement. Your Honor, my client would like to enter a guilty plea on all charges. He accepts responsibility for his actions and is prepared to comply with all restitution and penalties deemed appropriate by this court. There was a pause. The judge looked at him directly. Do you understand the implications of this plea, Mr. Elridge? Martin nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom was silent. Restitution was set at just over $125,000. That included the IRS debt, the funds stolen from WarePoint, and additional damages filed by me and 2 other victims. His sentence? 18 months in a correctional facility, followed by 3 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a ban from holding any fiduciary or managerial position in any company for 10 years. But that wasn't the best part. What truly made the ending satisfying was what happened next, because Nadira had done more than just prepare my case. She'd helped me file for a civil lien against Martin's remaining assets, including the equity in the house we once shared. Turns out, despite the mess of his finances, he still had partial ownership in a small piece of family land up north near Charlevoix, land he'd inherited from an uncle and tried to keep quiet, probably planning to sell later. We seized it. Legally, through a court-approved order, I had a financial claim to it. So did Anika. With a bit of work and a long paper trail, we sold it. Every penny went to cover court costs and pay back what he'd taken from all of us. I didn't get rich off it. That wasn't the point. But the moment I signed the sale papers and mailed the final check to my lawyer, I smiled in a way I hadn't in months. Maybe years. Because Martin? He walked into that courtroom thinking he was finally facing the music. He didn't know the women he wronged had formed a choir. The aftermath wasn't a movie montage of instant healing. It was quieter. Better. I still live in the townhouse. I planted a small garden out back, tomatoes, some lavender, a little patch of mint. I joined a book club. Started running again. Every Sunday, I meet Maureen for brunch and we don't talk about him anymore. Yvonne eventually started a podcast for women who've been financially manipulated in relationships. She asked me to record an anonymous guest episode. I said yes. Anika, surprisingly, got remarried last fall. A gentleman named Raoul who restores wooden boats on Lake St. Clair. She invited me to the wedding. I cried through most of it, but in a good way. As for Martin? He served his sentence. Quietly. No appeal. No letters. No contact. The last I heard, he was working retail under a different name in another part of the state. I don't think he'll resurface. He's lost his favorite trick, access. But even if he did show up again someday? He'd find a woman who isn't scared. Isn't soft to guilt. Isn't in any way interested in rebuilding what she didn't break. Because I wasn't the woman who got ruined.